In 04 BC, after ruling like a god over the Roman world for 42 years, Emperor Augustus finally stepped down, and his adopted son, Tiberius Claudius Netter, became the first of the Julio-Claudians to inherit the empire. The famous cognomen of Caesar Augustus had been bestowed upon him by the Senate, and so was the title imperator, which originally had referred to generals who had distinguished themselves in war. No, he wanted to indulge in whatever he desired, whenever he desired it. Tiberius was obviously quite fond of partying, but everyone agrees that he had a particular fondness for young men. It was common practice in the ancient world for wealthy Romans to keep prostitutes and slaves of all genders, and emperors were certainly no exception. These were massive wooden vessels covered with silk and gold, where Tiberius and his entourage partied while drifting through the moonlight. We can only imagine how lewd and depraved the parties became, as the moon sailed through the night sky and the winds carried the sounds of laughter and screams across the dark waters. However, Tiberius liked the way he looked and so invited him aboard his boat anyway. Balbillus spent the night with the emperor and woke up next to him in the morning, surprised to find himself alone. He was wearing only a thin tunic and had no memory of getting undressed. Obviously, he wasn't the only one who found himself in such a situation. There were many servants working on the boats who disappeared one night and never returned. Some people even believed that the ghosts of these poor souls haunted the island, moping around the shore and whispering stories of suffering and humiliation. And honestly, it's hard to say whether that belief was right or wrong. Sometimes Tiberius moored his boat near a beach and organized athletic competitions there. He died at the age of 78. Far from the eyes of the public and without fear of retribution, which is why there is little doubt that Tiberius will go down in history as one of the most ruthless and inhumane as well as one of the greatest libertines of all time. Winners received cash prizes, but really anyone who participated in the games had a good chance of being invited aboard. One fisherman named Lycus, for instance, won a prize for swimming around the ship as fast as possible. Another time, a group of athletes competed in discus throwing, javelin throwing, and wrestling and the crowds watched intently as the sailors commented on the competitors' technique. And I suppose it goes without saying that the most popular event of all was the swimming competition. For this, Tiberius had a special plank inserted into the water, which the contestants had to pass under while the emperor watched from his boat. That may sound simple enough, but it quickly became clear that Tiberius wanted more than just a mundane race. First, the contestants had to pass under the plank with their hands tied behind their backs. But that wasn't the end of it. Soon they had to complete the task while carrying weights, and with even greater difficulty. Eventually, the rules were changed so that the plank was lowered further and further into the water, and the contestants had to pass under it with their heads, then with their shoulders, and finally with their chests. By this point, though, everyone understood that Tiberius was trying to find someone who could do more than just swim. The real challenge was to swim between his legs. And so that's what the final contest was all about. The winner of the competition received a crown of gold, a handsome horse, and a cloak studded with precious stones. And if he pleased the emperor, he might be invited onto the boat for a reward that went far beyond any material possession. There is some debate as to whether these boats actually existed or not, but it doesn't matter because they represent a reality that must have seemed absolutely shocking to the people of Rome. As we saw in a previous video, orgies weren't unheard of in the Roman world. In fact, the Emperor Caligula was rumored to have hosted some pretty crazy parties himself. But those were different. Caligula invited 8 men, of only one type, bald, short, or fat. In other words, he threw a party for misfits. Tiberius, on the other hand, wanted beautiful young men, and so his parties were exclusive, decadent affairs filled with expensive food and drink, beautiful bodies, and endless entertainment. However, there is evidence that Tiberius went beyond mere patronage and actively recruited young boys and girls from across the empire, bringing them to Capri, where he taught them perverse acts. It was said that he showed little interest in women, aside from his wife, but he desired to know the sensation of being desired himself. So he dressed as a woman and prostituted himself in taverns, brothels, and baths. According to one story, he was so overcome with excitement at the prospect of engaging with another person sexually that he broke free of his guards and attendants and ran away from the brothel. When he finally got back to the palace, he asked the prostitute to come to Capri with him, but she refused. Instead, she demanded that he purchase her freedom, which he did, along with 2 handsome youths. And as we shall see, this resulted in one of the most insane and disturbing spectacles the world has ever seen. Tiberius summoned the freedmen to his presence, and then sent them away to bed with the women and each other. They were forbidden, however, to leave the apartment until he came for them. That night, the emperor spent many hours wandering around the rooms, watching the lovers as they slept, played, or gave themselves over to various lusts. This spectacle would have been outrageous even if it had taken place in a respectable house, but it was utterly unprecedented for an emperor to lower himself to such behavior. So naturally, people talked. Gossip reached Rome that Tiberius was living with several men and women in promiscuous abandon. The spoiled rich kids attending the gladiator games in the Roman Colosseum started chanting, "Money for prostitutes! Money for prostitutes. Then the whispers turned into shouts, and the shouts turned into outright accusations that the emperor was sacrificing sound morals and traditional virtue for shameful and perverted pleasures. People were shocked that he hadn't married any of his mistresses and made them Augusta. The word Augusta had originally been a title reserved for the wives of kings and was used to legitimize their children's claim to the throne. Now Tiberius had borne 2 sons with Livia, his wife, and 2 more with his freed mistress, but none of them bore the title Augusta. Therefore, rumors spread that the emperor was abusing his power to keep his relationships a secret and protect his illegitimate children. Before we get into the main course, let me just remind you to subscribe for more videos about ancient history and mythology. Together they formed the title Augustus, meaning revered. As such, it was only fitting that the Senate also named Tiberius's successor, his nephew Caligula, with the title Caesar. So when Caligula took the throne, he was known as Gaius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus, and after him, it was decided that all legitimate heirs to the imperial throne should be called Caesar Augustus. Tiberius was probably quite happy to give up being the center of attention, because he really didn't enjoy the role of an emperor all that much. In fact, he preferred to rule from a distance. At least that was the official reason why he abandoned Rome and moved to the small Mediterranean island of Capri, just off the coast of Naples. He claimed that he feared an assassination attempt on his life, but the real reason was probably that he liked to have fun. There were already some luxurious imperial palaces on Capri, but Tiberius rebuilt them, turning them into what Suetonius calls the most sumptuous residences imaginable. One was near the sea, surrounded by gardens, while the other stood high above the island on a mountain called Macenica. The emperor's apartments were located at the top, accessible through hidden doors from the corridors and connected by secret staircases and balconies overlooking the sea. And according to Cassius, these same apartments were separated by curtains and hung with heavy drapes, so that no one could see inside. In short, Tiberius built himself a pleasure palace, hiding from the prying eyes of the public, and that may have been part of why he chose Capri. After all, it wasn't exactly a place people visited often. But the thing is, Tiberius wasn't content with having simple pleasures. It is hard to understand the full extent of the debauchery that went on in the emperor's palace on Capri, because the sources are often contradictory and sometimes unreliable. What happened next is best summed up in the description provided by the Roman historian Tacitus. To make matters worse, he commissioned the construction of floating orgy boats. The thing is, no one knows exactly what went on board those boats. One day, an athlete named Balbillus arrived late for the competition and couldn't participate. What is certain is that Tiberius reigned for another 16 years after this, during which he enjoyed all the wealth, power, and pleasure that his position allowed him. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video and want to see more content like this. Bye.